What's up? This is Dr. Taylor Crick, and welcome to today's video on the limbic system and the cell danger response. So kind of an interesting title unless you're familiar with either of those terms. And I'm really excited to be recording this video because, in a functional medicine space, some people have their model where they only see thyroid patients or they only see gut patients or, they've picked, kind of a niche, but we tend to get mystery cases of, boy, why am I so sensitive? Why do I have this strange constellation of symptoms of migraines and vertigo and stomach pain and joint pain and brain fog and, etc. And so today's video is going to explain a lot of how that happens. And I think for those that watch it and those that are in this boat, it's going to be very, very helpful. So the limbic system and the cell danger response. There's a lot to cover in this, but it's really, really, really cool. So if you are somebody in that, kind of mystery, nobody can help me type of state, this is going to be really, really helpful for you. So, the first thing to mention is that, let's do that. Just that, with sensitivities, there is a spectrum, right? And so here are some things that we hear, occasionally. And just know that each one of these is somewhere along the spectrum of some people are so sensitive that they can't go and stay anywhere. They can never go travel. They can never go to a restaurant and eat and different things. So here are some quotes. I can't eat dairy or I get stabbing stomach pain. So that person, has recognized a sensitivity to dairy in some way, shape, or form. I can't handle roller coasters. They make me feel nauseous. And some people say, well, that's just how I'm wired. And absolutely very well may be. But what we're looking at is, you have a sensitivity to roller coasters, or some people get motion sickness and all these things. And as a practitioner, every symptom tells me something. Oh, I don't like perfumes. They give me anxiety. How about that one? To smells and to chemicals. Very, very common. In fact, I often ask my patients, I say, how would you feel if I trapped you inside Bath and Body Works? And they're like, that you could see the panic come over their face if they are on this spectrum of chemical sensitivity. I can't clean with chemicals. I get a migraine. How about that one? A lot of people, switched over to natural products, switched over to, essential oils and different things, not because they were, concerned about their long-term health or the environment or anything, more because they were experiencing certain symptoms and they were kind of forced to. My heart will unexplainably race out of nowhere sometimes. So heart racing, anxiety will hit people. Sometimes my patients will say, oh, I'm sitting in church. And it just hits me. I'm not thinking about anything. Or I'm sitting at home watching a movie and it just hits me. And it's like, wow, that kind of stinks. And it's unexplainable. I can't stay in hotels. I get hives. And hives, I just threw that in there. But going to hotels is sometimes a really risky venture for people on the sensitivity spectrum somewhere. And how about the last one? My panic attacks are so bad, I can't leave the house. And so that person is further down the spectrum of severity, right? And I've had people who their panic attacks are so bad that they can't drive certain places, or they can go certain places, but they can't go, kids who can't go into school, or people who here in Illinois who are afraid to drive across the river. So, and all these things fall on this spectrum of severity. So the point is just that if you have recognized a sensitivity to foods or to chemicals or to different places, you're along this spectrum somewhere. But some people are worse, some people are a 10 out of 10, and some people might be a 1, 2, or 3 where it's more manageable. And today's talk is going to tie in, especially for those people who are down in the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, really getting to the point where they can't live their life any longer. What can you do about these extreme sensitivities and what's going on in the brain that's triggered this? So some of the symptoms, that people will experience. So allergies, so runny nose, itchy, red eyes, histamine responses, right? And then people take antihistamines and it helps. And so they just say, oh, I have allergies. And they say, you say, to what? And they say, well, dogs, trees, whatever it may be. And they say, oh, every spring and fall I get allergies. Well, it's like, okay, what blooms in the spring and the fall? Nothing really. So there's some holes in the allergy explanation, but there's certainly histamine symptoms, and we'll talk about that. Sometimes it's on the skin, and it's more of like a hives or some kind of skin reaction. Maybe it's contact from touching a chemical. Maybe it's something that you eat that causes your face to flush or your eyes to get red or your brain to get foggy. Food sensitivities, like I just said. A lot of people know what those are. It can be stomach pain, can be headaches, can be brain fog, can be joint pain. Headaches and migraines are really common with the, especially migraines with the limbic system stuff. And anxiety or depression or just straight up panic attacks. And the point of this is that you feel like your brain is on fire. I've had people tell me, I feel like my brain is on fire. It feels so frazzled. And those are signs of neuroinflammation. So if you get anxiety that hits out of nowhere or depression that hits out of nowhere or just fear or panic, that is a sure sign that something's going on in the limbic system. In fact, as we're going to cover in a second, the limbic system is known as the brain's anxiety switch. A brain fog, sometimes just extreme forgetfulness, and sometimes pain, sometimes weird pain, like unexplainable type pain, almost like fibromyalgia type pain or ice pick pain or pain that moves around the body. One day it's the shoulder, the next day it's the neck, the next day it's the lower back, but you're always feeling these sensations of pain or like phantom pain. Even things like, people will say like, oh, it feels like a phone's vibrating in my pocket. These phantom sensations that are kind of unexplainable after you go to neurology and to all the people, And then often they will get what's called dysautonomia symptoms, which just means that parts of your autonomic or automatic nervous system are disrupted. So the autonomic nervous system controls things that you don't have to think about, like digestion and heart rate and breathing and some things like that. So you might get the heart racing, you might get palpitations. POTS is a fairly established thing where people they change position. They maybe go from lying down to standing up, and their blood pressure changes, or their heart rate changes, and their heart starts to beat out of their chest, their blood pressure drops, and it can be dangerous. But these are limbic system problems. Inability to control temperature, night sweats, chills, fevers, swinging from one to the other. And oftentimes these patients, they Google their symptoms and they think, oh, it's my thyroid. And we go and we check the thyroid and it's fine. But yeah, or dizziness or vertigo. So the tinnitus also, or dizziness, vertigo, just kind of a feeling of feeling a little off, or maybe a loss of balance a little bit, or like a little bit of the room spinning. And sometimes it's fleeting. Sometimes it'll be bad for a couple weeks and then it'll kind of go away and it'll kind of resurface and you don't really know why. And this is a potential explanation for those things. So once again, symptoms, depending on their age and symptom severity, meaning like how long have they been around the block and how bad is it? Because if somebody is 50 and they're at 10 out of 10, they've probably been to all these people. If somebody is 16, they've probably been to half of these people. But the hypersensitive or limbic disrupted patient has often been to their primary care physician, certainly. Then they've been to psychiatry or psychology or counseling and told, take this anti-anxiety med, take this depression med. They've oftentimes been to neurology. They've often had, if they have neuropathy, weird neuropathy that doesn't follow a dermatoma and these things, they'll have different scans, different nerve conduction velocity tests. They'll have MRIs of their brains, very, very often, and they'll be told, oh, it's good news, it's not MS, but we don't know what's going on. They've been to endocrinology. So once again, the thyroid, the adrenals, and they Google these things and all these things pop up. But their primary care will refer them out if they have a reason to, or neurology will pass them along to the next person. Or they've been to gastro, or they've been to rheumatology, or whoever else I didn't say. And then a lot of these people have been to Mayo Clinic because they feel like, okay, the doctors in my local area, and I'm speaking specifically here in the Midwest. A lot of my patients have been to Mayo, they've been to Iowa City, they've been to Northwestern. If you're in California, it's probably they've been to UCSD or UCSF or USC or some UCLA Medical Center. They've been somewhere big, thinking that they were going to get more answers. And oftentimes they haven't. And then they've been suggested or given multiple medications, including anti-anxiety or antidepressants, like I said. Beta blockers are common with the heart palpitations and some of the dysautonomia symptoms. Acid blockers, but for the most part, these people have little to no solutions that have worked or made any difference. Even some of the pain meds for fibro, gabapentin and some of those things don't sometimes touch a lot of these symptoms. Sleep disturbances, you could throw in almost any symptom to what we're talking about because it just jacks everything up, and these people have crazy, weird stuff going on. So how does that happen? Well, first off, genetics are certainly involved. So there is a genetic predisposition to this happening. So I do want to touch on that certain genes like methylation genes, MTHFR, MTRR, these are methylation genes. And they're certainly implicated in these hypersensitive patients and people that have trouble maybe clearing out toxins in a certain way. So methylation genes, COMT, that's a dopamine metabolizing gene and also metabolizes epinephrine, norepinephrine. It's also a methylation gene, but important for clearing out these neurotransmitters and important for building them too, and important for, sort of important in detox. The next ones are really important in detox, like CYP. There's a variety of what's called cytochrome P450. And the point of all these, GSTP1, if you've never had a genetic test, the point isn't oh, you need to rush out and get this. The point is that each one of us has a reason of why our bucket filled up. And that's the next picture there, is that the bucket fills up throughout life and triggers this. We're going to talk about what gets triggered in the brain. But so if you're not detoxifying, let's say chemicals, well, they're going to accumulate and that bucket's going to fill. If you, let's say, maybe don't have enough glutathione to clear out things like heavy metals or mold toxins, well, then they are going to accumulate faster. So it's always a balance of how much are you exposed versus how fast are you clearing these things out. And as long as you're clearing them out faster than you're exposed, you're going to stay on the good side of this equation. And that's the bucket. So things like past traumas, of course, foods, GMOs, toxins, synthetic chemicals, sugar, heavy metals. I wish mold was on here because I'm such a big mold person. BPA, other chemicals, pesticides. And the point is that this bucket fills up and overflows. So that's really a first grade analogy of oh, the bucket just fills and it overflows and you've got a detox. And it's all these BS things that natural practitioners say all the time, but it's what does that actually mean? And all these genes tell you what it actually means, and all these toxic compounds are certainly relevant. We've just got to figure out, what filled the bucket for you. But here's what happens. So the limbic system. So this is an area in the brain, and it consists of these specific areas. So this is a picture of it, and we're going to go to it. And just real quick, the hippocampus is involved with memory formation. The amygdala is involved with sensing different fears, safety versus fear. The hypothalamus is involved with different, and the cingulate cortex, but involved with different hormones and different regulatory controls. So hypothalamus and pituitary are going to communicate with adrenals and with thyroid and with reproductive organs. So the limbic system is a complex set of structures in the midbrain that consists of the hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, and the cingulate cortex. So the limbic system is constantly determining our level of safety versus danger. And it attaches memories to everything that we see, hear, smell, touch, and taste. So it's this area deep in the brain that attaches memories to everything that we've ever experienced and everything that we've ever done, even on a cellular level. And this is all from a website that I cite, later in the podcast of where I got some of these resources. And I'll tell you, some of the other people that are good to listen to for this. Dr. Neil Nathan is a great one. Jill Carnahan is a great one. So some people in the chronic toxicity world are really great. But it's constantly attaching a level of safety or danger to a memory, to an experience. And it's known as the feeling and reacting brain. And it's also known as the brain's anxiety switch. So when the limbic system, which is closely integrated with the immune system, with the endocrine system, with the autonomic nervous system, it's closely integrated with those. So when it gets disrupted, it causes those problems that we mentioned, like related to protection from infection and inflammation, the regulation of hormone balance, or regulation of unconscious body processes like heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, or breathing, and then can lead to symptoms like we mentioned, like heart palpitations, tinnitus, vertigo, migraines, temperature swings, mood swings, strange pain, or anxiety. Or let's say, in my office, I have a poster of the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and then the thyroid, the adrenals, and the reproductive hormones. And I say these hormones down here are oftentimes the symptoms, but the problems come from up here in the brain. So sometimes people come in with low, let's say a woman has imbalanced hormones and they've tried pellet therapy or they've tried cream therapy and blah, blah, blah. This was high, this was low. They also have thyroid symptoms. They also have adrenal symptoms. Well, we can't try to treat all three of those. We have to look upstream at what could be affecting all of those. And it comes to the brain, which is, obviously a pretty stinking important organ that's running and controlling and coordinating every single function in our body via the spine and the nervous system. And this is part of the chiropractic paradigm and philosophy, but it's especially true in these chronically ill, really sick, people with all these symptoms. So your body is just a bunch of cells. So now I'm going to connect, the limbic system and this thing called the cell danger response. So that's the limbic system in the brain. But when is your body experiencing, or how is it experiencing this danger, from being exposed to a toxin or from being exposed to mold or something? How can it lead to this, myriad of all of these symptoms from something so simple as mold exposure or toxic chemical exposure? So your body's just a bunch of cells, right? So if let's say a lot of your cells are screaming danger, 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 then your brain is going to associate danger with whatever it is you're doing. Even if you're on a walk with your wife, even if you're playing in the woods with your kids, even if you're, cleaning out, something. And my point is that a pleasant experience could be thought of from a cellular level as unpleasant if your cells are screaming danger. And so think about this, and I'll ask my patients this. Imagine if you smelled a rose and you touched a hot stove at the same time. Well, every time you smell a rose, what's your body going to do? You're like, I think that I'm going to get burned. And it takes a certain level of re-exposure and retraining the brain to get over that. We've all been hurt in the past. And we're talking a lot about toxicity, but this is very, very true with emotions too. And, like adverse childhood events and past traumas, 100% are a part of this. So I think that in the psychological world, they don't put enough value on what's happening in the physiological world. And I think in the physiological world, they don't put enough value on what's happening in the psychological world. And for us, we combine both of them. So there's a certain amount that the brain needs to be retrained that we're going to talk about as far as the solutions too. So what if your cells are always screaming danger, danger, danger? Well, you become sensitive to everything. And that brings us to something called the cell danger response, which I've recorded a video about before in the past. But the cells, if they sense danger, they go into a turtle shell, right? And they don't want to, and so do turtles, so do people. When the lockdowns first started, like people get scared and they go into hiding. And the author of these papers that I'm going to cite here, Dr. Robert Navio, he says cells behave the way that nations do. When they go to war, they harden their borders and don't trust their neighbors. And once again, I have another video going into the cell danger response a little bit more. But so what happens when your cells sense this danger? Well, here are a couple charts from Dr. Navio. And at the top is cell safety, and the bottom is cell danger. So, and I'm just going to go through some of these, fairly quickly. There's two of them. But just know that when your cells sense danger, things start to go haywire with regards to inflammation, with regards to hormones, with regards to your gut microbiome, with regards to neuroinflammation. So if your cells are constantly signaling this danger, danger, danger response, it throws things off metabolically. It triggers this limbic system dysfunction, and it's a big problem. So once again, top is healthy, bottom is cell danger. So your gut, if things are good, you have good brain-gut communication, and you get healthy. If things are bad, if there's cell danger, you start to get imbalances, you start to get gluten sensitivities, you start to get dysbiosis, you start to get symptoms. Heavy metals, or just regular metals, let's even say. So if things are good, these are catalysts for metabolism. They're used, things like iron, copper, zinc, manganese, etc., not necessarily toxic heavy metals that have they're non-hormetic. But they're catalysts for metabolism. But when things are bad, you start to get magnesium wasting. You start to get thiol inhibition, which is going to disrupt your glutathione productions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see like these are really, really important in the brain. And so is this one. So like tryptophan, if things are good, tryptophan gets turned into 5-HTP, gets turned into serotonin, gets turned into melatonin, all good. Things are bad, tryptophan goes down something called the kynurenine pathway, which is neuroinflammatory. And a lot of these people, these patients, have a lot of neuroinflammation, and they've got neuroexcitation, which is a byproduct of the kynurenine pathway. And so it leads to anxiety. If it's B6 or arachidonate, if it's B6, for example, it's a cofactor for over 200 enzymes. If it's bad, it's going to increase kynurenic acid, which can be converted into quinolinic acid and picolinate. Arachidonate leads to fear extinction if things are good, or it leads to inflammation if things are bad. Cholesterol leads to normal steroid hormones and normal cell membranes, which is really, really good. If things are bad, it leads to depletion of cortisol, so like adrenal fatigue or adrenal, issues. So all these things. Now here's the next one. If things are, let's go back to the brain. So like folate and methylation I mentioned, and SAMe, that's the body's universal methyl donor. These are important methylation, things. So if things are good, we get good methylation. If things are good with SAMe, we get good neurotransmitter production. If things are bad, we basically get problems. We want good neurotransmitter production when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to neuroexcitation. Let's look at vitamin D. If things are good, we get anti-inflammatory. If things are bad, we get inflammation, autoimmunity, affects the folate receptors. Cysteine, which is the precursor for glutathione, which clears out a lot of these toxic compounds. You need good glutathione for any of this. And if it's good, it goes to glutathione. If it's bad, your glutathione is getting used all the time for excretion. It's got to excrete chemicals and molds and metals, and it gets used up, and it leads to problems. There's some other things down here, but you'll see like inflammation, histamine, inflammation, etc. So that's the cell danger response. And there's the citation for this particular paper. There's really three great papers that I'm familiar with from Dr. Navio. They're unbelievable. And yeah, just super, super cool. So where is the danger, right? Why are your cells screaming danger, danger, danger? Well, a number of factors can trigger cell danger response, including chemical exposure, mold toxicity. I don't know why I didn't put these in any priority order, but mold toxicity should be number one and should be bold and should be underlined and should be a bigger font. Heavy metal toxicity, certainly. Virus or infection, like Lyme disease or COVID or Epstein-Barr or influenza, HHV, whatever. Past trauma, so PTSD, maybe like let's say you grew up and you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. Well, your cells sense that, and that danger is always staying with you. It's an allostatic load. It's an allostatic factor. And chronic stress. So let's say there's big things like that, or let's say all of your family members died when you were a kid. Like you got some issues, and with all due respect, of course, but you probably know that. But there are some things, the pathways that have been triggered that take some peeling back the layers of the onion to really get to. But my point is that psychological, there's also this physiological component with the toxins. Or chronic stress, so even chronic low-grade stress that's just kind of always telling your cells like, hey, things aren't necessarily perfect, and we got a lot of stress, we got a lot of stress, we got a lot of stress. Well, they begin to remember that. And chronic inflammation will also lead your cells to, once again, kind of go into that turtle shell, and they're like, hey, we don't want to come outside because it seems like it's always raining outside. Why would we want to come outside? We never see the sun. So that's where the danger can come from. And there's other videos and things that are really relevant to this. Like, I've got a lot of videos about mold toxicity, about detox pathways, and I've got a slide about that at the end. But this isn't the end all be all, all of the solutions. It's just a huge recognition of the problem. And I see people all the time that I tell this to, and this is going to save me, some time to send them this video and say, I need you to watch this video before your next consult. This is how we're going to talk about what's going on. But this kind of connects. And Dr. Navio, again, I showed that one paper. His other paper is really good, and it's more of a big picture, a perspective on this. And it just talks about connecting the dots of how the rising tide of chemical exposures correlates with the rising number of these diseases and the cost associated with them, and just the insane amount of this keeps becoming more prevalent, more costly. And I see it in my practice every day. And once again, the spectrum of severity. Some of my people can't come in because they can't leave the house. Some of my people are fine on the outside, but on the inside they feel like they're going to explode. And there's a spectrum of severity. So anyway, how do you reset your limbic system? Well, first off, three things really, I would say. One is you have to remove the source of danger. You cannot dry off while you are still in the shower. So in the context of chronic toxicity, that means detoxify. Now, some people hear me say that and they're like, okay, I need to go detoxify. And they just go like start doing stuff. And that is not what I'm saying at all. It's very specific to you and to what toxin you're dealing with, and which, going back to the genetic component, what are we targeting? Which pathways are we targeting? And what is our intention? Do you have a sluggish liver and gallbladder? Do you have, cytochrome P450 genes? Do you have low glutathione? Are you wasting glutathione for whatever reason? But detoxify is really, really important. And if you've ever heard the top 3 rules of mold disease, of Lyme disease, the rule number 2 is like detoxify, detoxify, detoxify. So yeah, very, very true. So some of those strategies are things like glutathione, things like using different binders that bind toxins and remove them, or restoring different detox pathways. What are we doing to open up the liver, to open up the gallbladder or the lymph? I just had somebody text me and he said, I want to know more about, he has a patient who you sat in a sauna and didn't sweat at all. I said, that's mold blocking that detox pathway. He said, I want to know more about the mechanism of that. But we need to open up these detox pathways. Cytochrome P450 would be another one with different, amino acids and B vitamins and glutathione and, tons of stuff. Tons of stuff helps phase 1, phase 2 detox. Phase 1 is cytochrome P450. And then you have to reduce the inflammation. So sometimes you have to heal the damage. If there's neuroinflammation, if there's this upregulated kynurenine pathway, if there's GI inflammation, if there's whole body inflammation, you have to reduce that. So that's body inflammation and brain inflammation. Gut health, an important part of that. Removing the toxins, an important part of that, etc. So this is, kind of 30,000 foot. But glutathione, fish oil, things like specialized pro-resolving mediators is kind of what I use, like resolvins, protectins, maresins. There are also lipoxins. But these are what's called pro-resolving mediators that encourage resolution of inflammation. Curcumin, turmeric, resveratrol, both shut down different inflammatory pathways. But yeah, once again, kind of like detox, you got to know what target you're aiming at. Are we trying to shut down what's called NF-kappa B? Are we trying to shut down inducible nitric oxide? Are we trying to shut down Th17? Are we trying to shut down STAT3 in an autoimmune pathway? Inflammation is bigger than just, take these anti-inflammatories. Then there's things like quercetin and bromelain. Now, let me touch on that real quick because I mentioned it earlier, but when this limbic system gets disrupted, it's intimately related to mast cells, which release histamine. So a lot of these sensitivities are akin to true allergies, but there might not be an IgE hypersensitivity, but still somebody walks into a building and their eyes get red and their nose starts running and it's going to get chalked up as allergies. But that's also, there's a mast cells scattered throughout the brain and really scattered throughout the body. And mast cells can kind of be described as like little landmines throughout the body that if they get triggered, they're going to pop off the next one and the next one too, and they can lead to a plethora of responses. So histamine is released by mast cells. It's the most famous, for over-the-counter antihistamines, but mast cells also release several hundred other inflammatory mediators. So sometimes these things can kick off this mast cell response, and we have to calm down this mast cell inflammation as well. Quercetin, bromelain, vitamin C, some other things that help with that. And then a lot of times we have to restore gut health and, fight off some maybe overgrowths or opportunistic infections like candida or sinus. I mean, my gosh, sinus infections, SIBO, dysbiosis or overgrowths or opportunistic infections of the gut. We've got to restore motility. You've got to restore vagal nerve activity because it's part of the limbic system. It's also part of the gut-brain connection. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But we've got to have good motility. The vagus is going to be responsible for motility and also be partly responsible for stomach acid production, for bile production, for digestive enzyme production, and how all that kind of feeds in and confluences around the small intestine. So a lot of that's crucial for reducing inflammation. But then the last one, the most important one, is you have to retrain your brain. And so you have to remove the danger first. So detoxification is an important part of this. And a lot of times by just removing the danger, symptoms are going to improve. But just like if I touched a hot stove when I was smelling the rose, let's say I did that when I was 8 years old and I never have forgotten it, but I don't remember it the way I was when I was 8. That was a long time ago. Got too long for me to even do the math on. But time heals, so these memories become less and less. Or your first heartbreak, you're not still bitter about that. Time does heal, but you have not forgotten. that if you do X, you might get Y as a result. So you never forget those things, but you have to retrain your brain. So some of the best programs that are out there, there are two that are very well known. There are others that are becoming more well known, and I'm sure there are some that I haven't heard of. But Annie Hopper's is really good, and that's where I took some of that just limbic system definitions from. It's the dynamic neural retraining system. So the website is www.retrainingthebrain.com, and she does an intensive, I believe it's 5-day intensive seminar in person that's would be massively helpful to a lot of these people, and the biggest bang for your buck, and quickly, get over some of this stuff. The other one is Dr. Gupta's, and then also with both of them, Gupta and Annie Hopper, they have an at-home version too that's considerably less expensive, but then you got to do a lot of your homework. And so with Dr. Gupta, same thing, there's the website there, but with both of these, they require a lot of work, okay? So from what I know about them, I've had a few patients do these. I had one patient that I remember who was very, very ill, and, when you're a practitioner, hindsight is 20/20. You're like, gosh, I wish I knew what I know now 5 years ago. But this person, we were doing a lot of stuff, but she, through a lot of these techniques, was spending, 90 minutes a day at least meditating and doing some of these things, and really credited that to a stark turnaround. And so for a lot of these chronically ill people, it's like, what do you have to lose? I would commit the time to it for sure. But yeah, so both of those programs are really good. Then there are some other things like, counseling is of course really good to look at some of these past traumas, to talk through some of this stuff, to get it off your chest. Also things like exposure therapy can be really, really good, and different methods. I don't think but like different CBT methods, cognitive behavioral therapies, and just different, ways to retrain your thought patterns. Maybe even some neuro-linguistic programming type stuff that you can do. But sometimes just talking these things out gets them, pulled out from deep inside the brain where they're stored. Meditation. Meditation's so helpful. So many people need meditation. And I would say that out of every 10 people that I tell that to, I would guess that 2 of them really do it and take it to heart. But my gosh, if you have a brain that's too excited, meditation is one of the great ways to calm it down. But meditation also helps strengthen the connections between the left side and the right side of the brain. Another one is affirmations. That's probably my favorite one. Now, affirmations is important to talk about because what happens is your conscious brain can trick your subconscious brain. Your subconscious brain doesn't know what's real and what's not real. That's why you could tell somebody like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to die from some virus, and everybody believes it. Even though you look around and it's like, boy, how many people do I know that have died? How many people am I seeing? And I'm not, I do know cases on both ends of the spectrum of severity, but you can induce fear pretty easily. And affirmations, you can also induce confidence. You can induce a lack of fear. So by consciously telling your brain things, even if you don't believe it, I am strong, I am financially abundant, I am resilient, I have abundant energy, I get stuff done, people like me, whatever. It's like the old Stuart Smalley or whoever, but they're really true. Affirmations are really, 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 really powerful. Another one is gratitude. Is once again, people forget about how much they have to be thankful for, and reminding yourself, being intentionally reminding. You talk to people, they're like, well, yeah, I like my house, I like my car, I like my kids, but you were spoiled rotten, right? And if you remind yourself of the abundance that you have, then you have no room left for scarcity. Of oh, where is my next meal going to come from? Oh, where is my next paycheck going to come from? Oh, where is my next this? Or I need this. I have to have this. Or you've always got those little itches that need to be scratched. And gratitude is the solution to that. Abundance is the opposite of scarcity. So you can remind yourself through, gratitude practices, gratitude journals, even affirmations. You're retraining your brain. So this all is neuro-linguistic programming. And then vagus nerve stimulation. So we are big fans of vagus nerve stimulation. We use a TENS unit on the tragus of the left ear. There are other ways to do it. It's becoming way, way, way more popular. But yeah, it's an amazing thing. I have another video of 6 ways to stimulate your vagus nerve, talking about gargling, talking about gagging, talking about hot and cold showers, I think, just some things like that. But the TENS, when you stimulate the vagus, what we want to do through meditation and through vagal nerve stimulation is we want to strengthen the body's ability to shift back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic, and vagus nerve helps do that. Or it's like, if somebody's sympathetic is their stress side, that's like your left side is real big, real strong, real developed because you're stressed, and your right side is like this weak little puny little, like my arm probably, like you're not that good on the parasympathetic side, so you want balance between those two sides. And then binaural beats is another one that we use to kind of retrain brain wavelengths. But over time, all these little things, if you continue doing them and you've removed the toxic exposure, you can absolutely retrain this limbic system disruption. You can get your cells out of this danger. You can allow your cells to come out of their turtle shell and start expressing metabolism the way that they're supposed to. And instead of taking vitamin D and methylfolate and adrenoglandulars and probiotics and 5-HTP and name something else. That's what that poster illustrates, is instead of trying to supplement your way out of this, we zoom out and we look at, what has triggered the brain to create all these symptoms, and instead of taking a supplement for each symptom, we look big picture at how can we change this person's environment and change their brain response, and all of a sudden these things begin to go away. So some of my other resources, the vagus nerve videos, like I just mentioned, 6 ways to stimulate the vagus nerve. Another one that's really popular, how to use a TENS device to stimulate vagus nerve. I have a testimonial that I'll upload onto YouTube that somebody that said that the vagus nerve stimulation had been life-changing for them. He was also doing coffee enemas as well, and he said that combo was life-changing. So really cool. Another one, how to push the brakes on stress. That's a video that we have that talks about how, once again, the sympathetic side is like your gas pedal, and the parasympathetic side is your brake pedal. How can you switch back and forth gracefully and seamlessly like a good driver? Detox pathways and protocols. So talking about cytochrome P450 versus glutathione versus phase 1 versus phase 2 versus phase 3 of detox. And what does all that mean? How to sleep better, of course, is a good one. Circadian rhythms, of course, are important for this. And then anything that we have about mold or mycotoxins, I think could be really, really helpful. But I hope that if somebody is out here watching this video and you find yourself anywhere on the spectrum of sensitivity, I think that everybody's on there. If you're not, it's a concern. But some people, you just notice one sensitivity, or you notice, a multitude, or if you're starting to have more symptoms, if you're starting to feel like, the medical system hardly listens to you, let alone has any solutions for you regarding, it's either an anti-anxiety med, or it's a pain med, or it's like, I'm going to send you to the next specialist. Think about this, because this could be relevant to you, it could be relevant to your kids, and it's a really, really important topic that we're seeing more and more of, especially in the case of mysterious, unexplainable symptoms.